Hey, all my IFG friends, this is Steve. I want to say, if you like movies like I do, we've started a new podcast called Happy Hour Flicks. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. It's all about nostalgic movies that we love, and we bring on special guests each episode, and we also have specialty cocktails made for each one, too. So it really is an hour of a good time talking about movies that we love, like Gremlins, Seven, Free Willy. We talk about The Last Starfighter also. I mean, we kind of run the gamut across all the decades and really have a great time. So wanted to invite you to come over and join us. That's Happy Hour Flicks, anywhere podcasts are found.
We happen to have this movie that fits within the world, and conceptually we're going to pod ourselves. We're going to be this small, tight-knit group, and we're specifically going to travel to locations and avoid COVID hotspots.
Basically, we take COVID and just lean into it, right? So everything that's a problem with COVID, we made it one of the things going for us.
This is the
Independent
Filmmaker's Guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
On IFG, we talk about independent film from development through delivery. By featuring discussions with creators and collaborators about their experiences, we form a roadmap to help you have the most success with your projects. Independent filmmaking already comes with so many inherent struggles. Now, imagine adding in all the extra challenges that took place in the middle of the COVID-19 outbreak and quarantine. Today, we speak with the filmmakers of the new indie feature, Every Man for Himself, about how they adapted their production to be filmed at the height of the pandemic.
Something this challenging during a challenging environment, like you have to have a great squad.
That's Monica Vega-Gorsa, producer of Every Man for Himself.
Wait a second, I'm supposed to be making movies. So, you work your ass off and try to find your way back.
And that's Gary Gardner, screenwriter and director. So you just produced and directed a film during COVID times. Have you even started editing yet? I'm your host, Stephen Pierce.
Indeed, we have. Yep, we wrapped about a month and a half ago. The movie is called Every Man for Himself. And it's about a reformed ex-convict of 4 years who returns to his old prison, and he picks up his old cellmate when he's released from prison, and they proceed to go on a cross-country drive to repay an old debt from the inside.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So it's a road trip story.
Yeah, it is.
The little I'd known about it beforehand. All right, so how did you guys meet? Let's start kind of from the beginning. Monica, Gary, how did you guys get connected, and how did the movie come about in your radar or onto your radar?
Oh, well, thank you, Stephen, for having me here, and nice to share our story. I think Gary and I pretty much connected years before on it was a high fashion brand commercial, and he was doing like another unit. And that was the first time that we didn't realize that until we were both in line at an IFP conference thing. And we just couldn't figure out like why we looked so familiar. But during waiting in line all day and, doing those meetings, we connect. It's like, oh yeah, I'm in Brooklyn, you're in Brooklyn. Started talking about food. And Roberta's and the best pizza, and then we realized we had worked together years before, and then maybe like a month or two after that he reached out to me to produce a commercial for him, and then we just kept working together, and now he's like my brother from another mother. We're both we approach work the same way, like pragmatic, fair, fun, don't be an asshole, get it done. So that's probably been, 7-8 years, Gary?
Yeah, maybe a little more.
Maybe a little more.
So you guys have worked, sounds like you've worked quite a bit in the commercial branded fashion world together before.
Oh yeah, a lot of branded content, a lot of commercials. Yeah.
I went to film school back when, with the intention of making movies, and then you finish film school and then you say, how am I going to make a living doing this? And you kind of end up doing advertising for many years. And then you say, wait a second, I'm supposed to be making movies. So, you work your ass off and try to find your way back.
But you know what, Gary? That's weird and funny that you say that, because I have to say, if it wasn't for all the commercials that I've done and the branded pieces, in a period of a year, you can actually execute 20 plus short stories. So you're constantly prepping, wrapping, prepping, shooting, wrapping, prepping, shooting, wrapping, prepping. So then it's just like, oh, I got to do this. You got to do this, because in commercials and branded content, you're in and out like the Marines. And so, like, for me to start up a company and to do the insurance, to do the credit card, I already know the vendors, I already have a relationship. And so when it comes to doing a film, I'm like, oh, I got time. Oh, I have 4 weeks of casting. Oh, thank goodness. I don't have to cram like 20 showgirl casting things in like, 3 days or whatever. So I feel that being in commercials really gets you super ready for a film.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to several people that have done that, and that's kind of been our background too. Is we've been making branded and commercial stuff for a long time, and as we've started to move forward, into trying to make films, it seems like a lot of it's going to translate, but it's a very, very different monster. It's not just wake up today and now you're making a film and you know everything. It's a very different world.
Oh yeah, that's very true.
So
Without
speaking of
question.
that, yeah, I think it's more of a statement, and I'm just letting the silence of effort resound through time.
Shaking my head, yes.
So filming during COVID is specifically what I think is interesting about you guys making a road trip, because you guys were filming during and especially a road trip during the heat of a lot of this. So what was different specifically about your approach this time than what you normally do? How did you say one day, this is okay, we can make this work?
Well, I think, when you start making a movie, it's kind of a big project. So this started way before COVID even began. Essentially, a year prior to shooting was when I initially came up with the concept for the movie and started writing it. And the idea from the start was, I'm going to make, a movie that we could go out on the road with a smaller crew and focus on what makes movies great, and it's the story and the acting and working with great people, and kind of thinking about how can I make the coolest movie with as little people as we could possibly have, and focus on the creativity rather than some of the bigger technical aspects of some high budget movie. So after spending 9 months working on the script, and then COVID was happening, and then the question was, well, I'm not going to just wait until the world comes around. This business as a whole, you kind of have to be relentless. So we kind of just had the mindset of, okay, what needs to happen to make a movie, and let's just take it from there, and let's not worry about COVID. Really, let's kind of ignore it for now. And there's so many things that you have to take care of and think about, and check boxes. So you kind of just start making a movie like any other thing that you would start to make.
Right, absolutely. And so you guys, I mean, you basically just turned into, sounds like kind of a pod, just like moving around the country. You guys are just basically
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, when I got more involved and took over the production again, because I was a little out in the beginning of it because I had a child, and so in the beginning of COVID. But then once we started really like, okay, Monica, like you have childcare, let's do it. I'm like, let's do it. And so basically you take COVID and just lean into it, right? So everything that's a problem with COVID, we made it our one of the things going for us. We have you have way more actors available to you because they're not working, right? So then we can also, I think one of the challenges though, obviously, was that SAG, right? Our film, SAG made it very clear to us, our film was the first film to be approved for on location. By that time, once we started our dialogue, they started shooting in New York for about 2 or 3 weeks out in LA, from my understanding. But our shoot would be the first one that's traveling on location. Everything else had been in a very like lab kind of setting, like on stages where to have complete and total control. And so with COVID, our production got pushed. Was it 3 times, Gary?
Yep, 3 times.
Yeah, 3. We had to go back, but each time we did that, Gary and I like really looked at the film, and Gary went back and rewrote, because I think it gave us an opportunity. It's like, okay, how are we going to make this even tighter and make it even tighter and even tighter? And once we got the crew that we wanted, worked with the vendors that we wanted, because everybody had not worked in so long. Everybody was just so excited to work. And then obviously it had to be super buttoned up, because you don't want to be that, pardon my French, the asshole that gets your crew all sick during COVID, So we went back and forth, and we got approved with our plan, which was, we ran a tight ship. And it was it was pretty incredible.
Yeah. And just to speak to the pod idea, I mean, when we first, set out to produce this, there wasn't any guidebook. There wasn't any specific, rules in which one should follow. So you kind of had to make it up. And, our first idea was, okay, well, just by default, we happen to have this movie that fits within the world, and conceptually we're going to pod ourselves. We're going to be this small, tight-knit group, and we're specifically going to travel to locations and avoid, COVID hotspots. So, we actually, that was our whole design, and that was like how we're going to make this movie, just thinking about how we're going to pod ourselves. And as we were, kind of developing this, at the same time, SAG started to come up with rules and started working with studios at, deciding like what are the rules going to be. And SAG was working with all the other unions, and they essentially, made one rule book called The Way Forward. But while that Way Forward was being made, we already kind of created this idea of like this pod that we were going to make. So long story short, the pod idea that we presented to SAG, because SAG needed to approve the project, so they would allow the actors to participate in our project. And they said, no, that's not good enough. So like we actually spent months building a whole plan, thinking about locations, designing everything that we were going to do, and they said no. So we kind of actually had to go back to the drawing board and rewrite our plan and our individual way forward, which you can't have your own way forward. You kind of have to abide by the rules of of the industry.
Right. Obviously, what was different about what they ended up approving versus
Just
what you've done initially?
Simply put, like it was testing, how many tests needed to be done, and, and how they were going to get done. Like, that was like the biggest, separation between, what we originally had set in mind, and what, what they wanted from us.
It put our budget 15% more by the time we started it, and where we ended and what was acceptable. We're 15% more than what we had budgeted for COVID.
When were you filming? What dates were you out on the road?
Let's see, our first shoot date, I believe, was August, 16th or something.
We were in the West, like Idaho, Utah, and Montana. But when we went, they had like one county had nothing, a few counties had nothing. There was a lot of research.
Right. So what testing did they end up making you have to do? Because you're traveling, you're literally traveling from town to town to town, right? You did like an actual road trip rather than being like create a circle and drive around this space, or how did you approach it?
Yeah. At first, our original plan was we were going to get tested once a week and find locations, but we were shooting in Utah, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And, in some of these, we were in very isolated rural areas, and some of these places don't have wasn't even
testing wasn't even a thing.
Days of research. So the solution was, now there's tons of them, but like you hire like a set nurse type of person or a set medic. And now there's a number of companies like that now that all studios are using. But at that time, there was a handful we used. So basically, instead of having somebody traveling with us, we did like telemedicine. And so they sent to us the number of tests that we needed for the shoot, so that it's the whole crew and the actors, and you get tested every 3 days. And so you take the test, you do telemedicine just like what we're doing right now. You administer it yourself, or you have another crew member that's been trained to do it, to administer, and then you ship it out. And so it's very rapid. And so you're constantly testing and testing and getting the results, testing and testing. And it worked. It worked.
So does that take like 2 or 3 days to get those tests back? I think even now, where was it then?
You have to get the test results back in less than 72 hours. So essentially you would self-administer a test on a morning, let's say Monday morning. You would overnight it to the lab, and they would receive it on Tuesday morning. And within 24 to 48 hours, they would provide the results to you online via text or via text message. You would receive a notification, and you could log on to the portal and receive your results. So it was just constantly happening, and it became part of the production schedule. We had to schedule it as part of our days. We would meet for breakfast and testing, and everyone would test, and and then we'd the crew members would everybody would go about their days, go get the lights and whatnot.
Yeah, I kind of want a little context for like how this is moving, because you guys are physically moving through the country filming. How many vehicles are in your caravan? What's your crew kit like? What's your total footprint?
So generally speaking, our footprint was 8 people traveling, 2 talent, and the DP, an AC swing, myself, a traveling producer, a traveling kind of AD assistant. How many is that?
Well, the AD assistant was like, he was more of the both of them like were fixers. Then we have sound.
Yep, and sound, and then we had 5 remote producers that could help coordinate everything, from where we're going to, the testing that we need to get done, scheduling, budget, everything.
So how were you? I mean, I want to get later whenever we could see the movie. I want to get into how you actually shot it, but just for context wise, how many vehicles does it take to move all those people in a picture scenario? So are you like watching wireless video? How are you monitoring audio? How are you coordinating all this?
Yep. So what we did, we had 2 vehicles, and the picture vehicle was a white pickup truck with a quad cab, so there's a back seat. And what we did was the production vehicle was an identical vehicle. So, as you're on the road, should anything happen, you could jump in the other vehicle and continue shooting. So 4 people in one vehicle, 4 people in the other vehicle. In one vehicle, it was the 2 actors, myself, director, and the camera, the DP who was operating. In the other vehicle, you had the sound, the swing, the producer, and the AD. So back of both truck beds literally filled to the brim. One truck had the camera gear, and the other truck had personal belongings, and like literally you could probably fit an iPhone. That's how much space was left by the end. It was like every morning we got to the point where you have to know exactly how to pack this truck.
Yeah. And I know, Gary, you keep saying he's an AD, but he was really a fixer, because we made I want to point this out, that we made a very conscious decision not to have an AD, and that to speak to Gary's, working with Gary is a complete pleasure, because I am working with a talented director that not only is a great writer and is great with working with the DP and working with the actors, but also Gary can speak to logistics and everyday, like the behind the scenes. And so to go out into this production, I knew that we were always going to make the day, because Gary has the ability to think with both sides of his brain. So we had an AD type of person that was there to keep Gary like on track, but it was never like a true AD in the sense of like somebody's like flushing out the schedule and stuff like that. That was one of the producers that was remote, that, you know, they had worked with Gary, like mapping out the actual like road map of the road film and making decisions. And again, like during this, Stephen, like there was no tech scouting.
So you're just rolling up to a place and like guessing what it is. It's a lot of Google mapping, I'm guessing.
Yep. Yeah, it was. As a personal love of mine, driving cross country is just something that I've always had fun. And not that I've gone to any of these specific places, but when you do it often enough, you kind of have an idea of what it's like, and how to be on the road. And yeah, thanks for those kind words, Monica. Yeah, I mean, in a way, you're leaving it up to chance, and in a way, it could be your best friend and it could be your biggest enemy. So as the whole thing was planned out beforehand and mapped. And yes, Google Maps was our best friend, as COVID was going on and we're stuck at home. You map out your day and you say, okay, this is 250 miles we have to travel to get to our next location. What roads are we going to take? What scenes are we going to shoot? Are they scenes that take place in the vehicle? Are they scenes that take place, on and off, like off the road? And you kind of figure out how much time it's going to take. You estimate how much time it's going to take, but you don't really know what the locations are going to look like, if they're going to be, what you want. And you have to have the ability to, make adjustments on the fly. So, sometimes it made it super challenging, like if a scene called for a riverside, you got to find a riverside and you can pull up and, who knows what it looks like. And those things, make it super challenging and hard, but it also makes it beautiful because you show up somewhere and it's, the universe, gives you gifts.
Two things that I like, as you described the trucks and like the setting of the logistics, two things jumped to my mind. I was like, that means that everywhere you're stopping that's a hotel, every night you have to unload and reload these damn trucks.
Yes.
Which sounds like miserable. Drive for like, probably 10, 11 hours.
Yeah, but you know what? Like this is where it comes into all those years of working in commercials. Like you're in and out, and I have done that. I did camera, I worked myself up, then I switched to production. So, I'm just talking to my DP and I was like, okay, what can we drop? What's essential? Like, obviously you're not going to come to the set with a gearhead, but like, what do we need for some key scenes? And so we're working it out and just feng shuiing, and you just keep trimming it down. But I'm always making sure that he has the support that he needs and the gear, because I can't send them out with like just one paintbrush. They need to be able to do a canvas. So like, all right, let me get you this stuff, but if we don't need it, like let's consolidate. And so it's surprising. It's like, but that's what people did back in like the 60s and 70s. They didn't have tons and tons of stuff when they went out and did some incredible films. And I think a lot of those films really inspired you, Gary. Like just keeping
absolutely.
it raw.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you have to include, the limitations into the creative. When you're doing something like this, COVID, small budget, just indie film in general. Like if you're making an indie film, your ideas have to include the limitations of what you're going to have available to you, because otherwise it's going to hurt you. But if you use it to your advantage, then it becomes one of the greatest assets, and it makes your movie better. So it's super challenging. You have less tools, but at the same time you have less tools. You can move faster. We were moving at an unbelievable pace, but yeah, it's a pain in the ass at the end of every day. You gotta unload it all. You have very expensive camera gear, and every morning you just have to plan. Like when we first started, we planned like there's going to be an hour every morning just to get the gear from the hotel room back into the vehicle and get everything back into the trucks. And after you do it for a certain amount of time, you kind of whittle it down, and it becomes like, okay, we only need to, uh, have 45 minutes. Oh, okay, we only need 30 minutes. But then on days you have COVID testing, then it's like, okay, well, you're not actually starting right away. You gotta leave a half
Right.
an hour for COVID testing. So, you start to plan your days around, getting in and out of hotel rooms. And do you have to COVID test that day? Do you have to find a mailbox? You can't
That's what I
just
was
do.
about. That was my other second thing. I was like, that means the whole time you're
Yep.
coordinating, trying to find a damn FedEx in the
Yep.
middle of nowhere, Idaho, to ship out a bunch of tests.
Yep.
I was like constantly being like, we'll drive this way.
That's a thing. And if you drive 15 minutes in the wrong direction, that's a half an hour. So every decision you make is expensive and time consuming. And if you're spending 15 minutes going to a FedEx and 15 minutes backtracking, that's 30 minutes you didn't shoot. So
Yeah.
every you're really thinking about every detail.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about like our crew. I mean, it's really, I think when we were talking to crew and to talent, or just across the board, getting on this journey, it's like, yeah, we have to be, this is it, and we went through a few prospective DPs, and then I was like, man, who's going to be the right person? Like everybody I'm talking to that I've like worked with recently, I was like, this is just not a right fit. This is not the right energy. They're not on for an adventure. They're too precious. And I was like, you know what? I think there's the right person who is an incredible level of creativity, incredibly kind, but a great approach. And that's, I was like, I haven't worked with Igor in a really long time. I'm going to see if he's available and down for this. Seems like, because it's a road film, it's very like tactile, and he was available. And we set up a meeting time, and he read the script, and it was just a perfect match. And that, I have
Yeah.
to say, is so key in this, is if you're going to try to attempt something this challenging during a challenging environment, like you have to have a great squad. And I'm just very happy about that. And our sound guy, Jose, was also just so chill and understanding. And I think that was incredibly important to us. It's like, this is going to be hard. We just don't like, we need the right energy on that's understanding,
Yeah, was he able to like monitor audio whenever he was out, or did you do the thing where you just drop it in the cab and you're listening to it?
Okay, so just the production as a whole was thought out, top to bottom. So the DP, Igor Kropotov, super brilliant guy. He obviously had a lot of limitations that he had to work within. We're in a vehicle, we're traveling in a vehicle. So,
You got to really, really like French overs.
French overs, yeah. You lean into these things.
And he's a tall guy.
He's a big guy, and to Monica, and he's an adventurer, and he is a very creative guy, so you think about the limitations and, how does that contribute to the story? So he had his hands full, literally, being in a small packed car, with 3 other people, and, what can you do? And he took it so far, he really, did wonders for this movie for sure. And the sound guy, Jose Gariti, he was not able to travel in the car and monitor audio a lot of the time. So how did that work? We basically would draw, he would set up, he would mic the vehicle and mic the individuals, based on where the camera was positioned and, which direction we're shooting in. And mic it multiple ways. And then he would go in the other vehicle, and we would drive for a half an hour and shoot, as many takes as we needed. And then we would pull over, readjust the camera, readjust, the lighting. We were not using lighting. We were, kind of blocking off light, to be honest. And we would readjust the microphones every single time. So it certainly, that was part of what we would do, so you wouldn't spend your time, trying to fix lights for 2 hours. You'd spend your time like, okay, we're about to drive and we're driving northeast, and depending on what time of the day, where's the light coming from, and is there mountains, and how do you use what you have in your best favor.
So, I mean, that's a lot to ask of your cast as well, it seems, because you have two actors and obviously they're physically moving through space, they're driving. I mean, how did you guys shoot? Were you able to do like something sequentially or what?
Yes. So the two actors, Daniel Sharman and Nicholas Logan, super talented guys, and we certainly gave them a challenge, which was you're going to be in a vehicle and you're literally going to experience this. And part of the creative concept was allowing the universe to affect what it is that we're doing from a story and from a behavioral standpoint. So we're just going to use it, and if the sun is in your eyes, then it's a challenge. And if you're driving fast, it's a challenge. And if you're driving, period, it's a challenge. And for Daniel, who played the character driver, he literally had to drive and act at the same time. So obviously safety comes first. And you think about you kind of think about what the scene is, and you talk about it beforehand, and you make sure nobody's in harm's way. And you think about roads that are the safest. You don't drive on major interstates and expect somebody to act and drive at the same time. But you find a nice off road, and it 100% impacted the way he acted, just because if you're feeling frustrated, if that's what the character is going through, and like you're stuck behind a vehicle, or you drive off road and the rumble strip starts to rumble underneath you, it creates a mood within the car, within the characters and the relationship and the dynamic. So you kind of have to lean into it, and obviously think about safety as you're doing it, and allow people to stop acting and like just focus on driving at moments.
For a second, yeah.
But generally it made the movie better.
So overall, what is there anything you feel like you didn't get, or that you had to change and rewrite and adapt on something that you wish you could have done a little differently?
So I mean, when I originally wrote the script, it called for a 7,000-mile drive that we would, visit, all these different cities, and COVID, kind of said no, and we were just wanted to be reasonable about it. So, just rethinking about the locations that we visit, was the first thing that got off the table. Like you just like, okay, we're not going to visit that city, and so it started, COVID, and and where hot spots were happening was kind of just redirecting where we were looking at potentially shooting. And
also the duration of the day, like half the film, 8-hour work days.
Right.
Is that what were you able to do 8 hours on this one? Because I mean, there's a big push right now from so many people.
Half the film, half the shoot days were 8 hours.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm a huge advocate for shorter days. I think everybody is. Everybody that's worked the 14, 16-hour, day, so many days, it's brutal, and it's unsustainable, and it wrecks lives and people and mental stuff. So I'm all big on that. So that's amazing. You guys also, with all these constraints, still were able, you pushed yourself to maintain the healthiest work environment.
For sure. I mean, you're just, it's a part of it, there are 8 people traveling, and every decision you make affects everybody. There's nowhere to run and hide, and you're all in it together. So you have to work with people that care and are passionate and want to make a great movie. So if small decisions of do we want to finish shooting the scene before lunch, and the implication is the next town that actually has food is not an hour, not for an hour and a half or 100 miles. It affects everybody, and it affects the mood. So you kind of have to be really smart, and everybody just needs to be communicating and on the same page, and you make decisions as a team. and for the better.
Of course. I mean, honestly, the 8-hour day makes me feel so much better about this whole thing. It makes it hopefully, that's my hope going forward. Because honestly,
Yeah.
practically, I think it's going to be really a 10-hour day. You know what I mean? But the thing is whenever you do a 10-hour day, it's actually a 12-hour day because location's got to be there early. You know what I mean? The AD's got to be there
It's
late.
just
Like
such a
everybody's.
different, this is a bubble. Like this is such an like lightning in the bottle, Stephen, you know, because we're working with a very buttoned up tight script. Gary knows what's happening on Wednesday 2 months ago, right? He knows what he wants from the story that day, and he lets his actors drive themselves, no pun intended, right? And these actors are incredible, like so collaborative, but also like within their craft, but also as teammates, you know, like Gary's picking up a case, they're picking up a case, like everybody's working on it together, and just it's almost like a fun, like being kids, you're like, oh, let's do this. You don't have like these suits on the set telling you this, and like people like in your ear making you double think, you know, like we're just all together, you know, doing this. And so it ends up being like a really well-oiled machine, and you really have, it's just if it just, all the pieces really fit, and it's just such an anomaly, you know. And that's how
amazing.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, if the actors, and they're just so open and honest with Gary, and it was just such a safe environment. And so I'm just really excited to see, you know, everything on the big screen and see everybody's faces, because it's just such a challenging, yeah, it's COVID, but everybody's bringing their COVID experience onto set, you know. And I really keep saying it, we just kept leaning into it.
Right. So are you going to do any pickups? Do you have any plan to do pickups, or is it basically what you see, what you got's what you got at this point?
I mean, I think we got it. If I'm being honest, like I think it's, you know, we created an
Knocking on
experience.
wood.
But at the end of the day, you're going to edit the movie, and whatever it takes to make the best product, you're going to do what you got to do. And that being said, you know, you just think about what you're shooting, and you know, hopefully you really got to know why you're doing it, you know, and what each moment means, because there's no time to think, there's no time to, you know, to redo things. We did have time to like redo a scene that, you know, I think as a group we collectively like we could do better, you know, we could do better. But you set out to make a movie, and like, you know, whatever the end result needs, that's what it's, you know, if it requires us to reshoot, we'll see, you know. But
So
right now
what's your schedule for the for finishing? You guys have an expected end date for when the movie's hopefully going to be finished, and then start looking for distribution, or have you had discussions with distribution with anybody?
it is an independent film, so you know, we're making this with, you know, through blood, sweat, and tears, you know, before a distributor is involved. So there's no exact set timeline, but we're moving at a voracious pace.
If people wanted to follow you along your path here, how would they do that?
You could follow me on Instagram at Gary Gardner Film is my handle. Yeah, there will be all kinds of great stuff, you know, in regards to trailers and websites when the appropriate time comes along.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that we throw it out there to everyone as well. And Monica, Gary, it was wonderful to get to meet you guys, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Okay, what are our takeaways, Steve, after a great conversation with the filmmakers who made a movie during the COVID outbreak?
They did it also kind of early on when testing wasn't really a thing and it was a lot harder. And they had those at-home rapid tests, which are pretty good. And I mean, they get like 2 or 3 day turnaround. I mean, totally makes sense. It just, you know, that's awesome. They were able to coordinate with SAG and get that all done. It's pretty impressive to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Obviously, they had a whole extra hurdle of things to get around during COVID, but you know, also just the nature of it being an independent, small budget movie on the road. Already, there's so many things there, and some of my takeaways just have to do with how they handled that. Like, I love how
they doubled their production vehicle and the camera car. So they had 2 vehicles, 1 camera car, right? That was talent essentially. They were filming, but they made their production vehicle the exact make and model as that camera car. And I thought that was a really good idea.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think that was really smart too. I mean, it seems like the kind of movie that would be a lot of fun, right? Where you kind of go out on the road with 8 people, you bond for 3 weeks, and you have a great time filming with each other. And I'm sure that that's going to reflect in the product too.
It reminds me almost of a lot of those kind of road movies from the 60s and 70s. And
Right.
Monica even mentioned that, back then they didn't have so many of the luxuries and technologies that we often have today. And they didn't have many of those luxuries when they were in production. So you just kind of make it happen, just like everything else.
Yep, exactly. I mean, I think the lesson here is grab a hold of it and make it, and you can do it regardless of limitations. You know what I mean? Like you make excuses, or you can make it go.
Let's make it go.
Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, and so is this podcast. Please take a second to subscribe so you know about future episodes, and leave a review. It really does help us. For more info about today's guest, please visit independentfilmmakersguide.com, where you can check out all our episodes that run the gamut of filmmaking topics. They're available in both audio and video format.
IFG is created by Framework Productions. This episode was directed by James Allerdyce, produced and edited by Matt Mundy and Audrey Ray McHale, and hosted by Stephen Pierce. The music is by Glassboy. Find his music on freemusicarchive.org. See and listen to all the episodes, plus bonus content at independentfilmmakersguide.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey friends, we just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about 2 personal things. First, we wanted to thank you, our listening community, and our wonderful guests, learning so much together along the way and continuing to learn, sharing our stories, making a lot of new friends, and collaborating, which is exactly what this is all about. Which also brings me to my second point. In great part to many of these new relationships, we wanted to let you know that we've taken a lot of this advice ourselves and made our own narrative feature film, Herd, H-E-R-D, Herd, which is premiering this October on Friday the 13th in select theaters as well as on VOD. Personally, I think it's the perfect kind of scary movie to watch during our favorite scary season. So we'd love for you to celebrate with us and watch Herd. You can pre-order it on Apple TV, and of course, do the communal thing, see it in theaters. Of course, for all of this, please see our show notes, but basically, we're going to keep it all updated at herd.film. That's herd.film, herd.film as well. Thank you again, and be sure to give us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts so we can continue to build this community and collaborate. IFG, how movies get made.